We will now do a brief review of design methodologies, and more importantly, I'll explain to you the design methodology that I will use in our case study. This design methodology that I will be using, I have seen used very consistently in VMware work, and you might be from a Cisco side. If you have experience in designing Cisco networks, may be accustomed to PPDIOO, which is prepare, plan, design, implement, operate, and optimize. Or if you come from the Cisco Unified Communication side, you have, which is very much based actually in my opinion on implementation. You have requirements gathering, your solution requirements, you have a couple of assessments of infrastructure, network, and your operational readiness. Whether the site has to be developed, and then you do a detailed design and implementation plan, you stage and configure the solution, and then you install it, and it kind of ends there. What I like about PPDIOO is that after the implementation, they have two more very important phases, I think: operate and optimize. So one thing to keep in mind is that whenever you do a design, and I've stressed that in all the design courses that I've done, is that the design, your work does not end by actually designing a solution and designing an implementation and creating an implementation plan. You have to have in there how your design will actually operate, what are the things that will be monitored, what kind of organizations might be required to operate that, and what happens if things have to change. So there's an optimization phase in there as well, where there is some probably some intense monitoring for some period of time to make sure that everything is working as designed, because life intrudes on our designs, real life, right? And sometimes things do need to change. So with that, let me switch to the design methodology that we'll be using for the case study. It's actually very straightforward. We look at the customer requirements, we look at the long-term vision, at the long-term IT plan if that exists, otherwise have discussions with the customer, look at the long-term business plan as well, and try and gauge an understanding of the overall direction and what might be some new ideas you may that your customer may want to consider. After all, you are an expert in design, right? I usually find that the short-term requirements, which are usually 1 to 2 to 3 months in my opinion, are usually not relevant, because you don't want to compromise your design for short-term considerations. So if at all possible, a really robust discussion with the customer might be necessary. Constraints, so you may be in a situation where there may be, and this is usually the case, constraints on funding. You never have an unlimited budget, so your design has to comply with meeting the requirements and within the constraints. In many cases, especially if you're looking out, on the longer side of medium or in the long term, some assumptions have to be made, because what is going to happen then is sometimes a little bit unclear. Other kinds of assumptions also actually exist. So if you go to your customer in this and you start discussions about how the design would be actually supported, your customer may be in a situation where they are changing vendors, or they are bringing in their support in-house or outsourcing it, and so on. So, and they don't quite know because they haven't made a decision. But your design work cannot wait. So you have to make some assumptions, and always validate your assumptions with the customer. At least try and get some sign-offs if you possibly can. And the last factor in this design methodology that's considered is risks. You have to, for example, one of the examples that always sticks in my head is the fact that you are asked to come in and do a design. So you ask the question, well, what is your physical network going to look like? And the answer is, I don't really know right now. We are using a three-tier data center design now, but in about 6 months to 1 year, we'll be moving to a new data center, and that's where your design will be implemented. So you ask the question again, so what will that physical data center network look like? And the answer again is, I don't know, because we haven't gotten there yet. Now, of course, that means that your design may run on an entire spectrum, ranging from a three-tier data center design to the more modern version, which is a leaf spine routed data center infrastructure, and you simply don't know. Okay, so it's kind of important to highlight that risk and make sure that the customer actually understands that. And in this, so really, as you've seen, I mean, I haven't talked about the phases. So the phases of this obviously are that there's a high level design that's done first, and then you do a logical design and you kind of iterate through it and verify it with your customer, and it's only after that that you actually jump into physical components and look to figure out what are the right pieces of hardware you need, and so on, to actually make all this work. So I've not talked about the phases in this. It's just the design methodology of customer requirements, constraints, assumptions, and risks. Look at that and iterate through a process in terms of phases that goes starting from a high level design to a logical design and then to the physical design. And for this course and in our whiteboard activity that we'll be getting to, I will be focusing on the high level design because the idea is to look at different options and look at the upsides and the downsides